I would normally start with the bare hook, and the hook size depends on the weight of the jig I am making. This particular jig happens to be a 1/4 ounce jig. I place the hook in a lead pouring mold, and after melting the appropriate amount of lead and pouring it into the mold, the hook can be removed once it has cooled. Then I need to trim off the excess lead and file any leftover lead from the mold. For this demonstration, I will be starting with a jig that I have already poured. I powder paint the jig head. This process is done by quickly heating the lead of the jig with a lighter and dipping it into the powder paint color of my choice. It is then hung on a rack to cool down and allow the paint to harden. Once I have painted enough jigs, I hang them in an oven and bake them at 400 degrees for 15 minutes. This completes the hardening process of the paint. After the jigs have cooled down from the baking process, the tying process then begins. Now this is where I choose the color of feather and thread I will be using for each particular jig. Some jigs are much more intricate than others and depends on the species of fish I am going for. I begin the tying process by placing a jig into the hook vise. And then, using a threading tool called a bodkin, I will make the first few wraps of thread around the hook shaft. This gives me a starting point to anchor my jig material, which can be either feather or various types of fur, again depending on the species of fish I am trying to catch. For this particular jig, I will be using dyed rabbit fur. After I have selected the material that I want, I will anchor it to the hook shaft with several wraps of thread. Once the material is securely anchored, I then begin slowly wrapping around the hook, making sure to keep all the hackles in one direction. When I have completed the wrapping process, I will then tie the end of the material using a threading tool. After this is done, I trim any excess material and place a small drop of jig glue on the final knot of thread to help keep from untying or unraveling once it gets wet. I then remove the jig from the hook vise and I'm ready to go fishing. And this is how I custom make a jig.